The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials, named Jairus, came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with Jesus, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come, lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live." Jesus went off with him, and a large crowd followed him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet she was not helped, but only got worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But the disciples said to him, "You see how this crowd is pressing in upon you, yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" As he looked around to see who had done it, the woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside, except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, Why this commotion? Why this weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." They ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha hakum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that, they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this and said that she should be given something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. Today is the memorial of St. John Bosco, as indicated in the opening prayer. John Bosco died in 1888, and it's said that 40 million people passed by his casket at the time of his death. He's the only saint whereby, upon his death, a national holiday was established in Italy. Obviously, the man was highly regarded, and I would suspect had quite a charismatic personality. Although he had great hardship in his own youth growing up, he really was, he worked with youth, and then someone said, you ought to be a priest, and you ought to really take these young people under your wing and teach them the way of the gospel. And he did exactly that. He He had a very functional or practical style of education, really, in a sense, showing young people, boys in particular, how to do things, not just giving them mental or intellectual lessons, but showing them how things were done. He was also very conscientious as to provide for them environments where they would not have undue temptation to sin. Now that's hard to do, don't you think? Probably harder today because we have all these electronics and media and that. But notice the virtue of the man, his love for God and his concern for the innocence of these young souls. I find a bit of a contradiction there where we're seeing many, or hearing about and seeing many other young people, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, who are really quite lost emotionally, perhaps because of COVID, perhaps because of violence in schools, home environments, dysfunction, and, no personal friends, but I have 300 friends on Facebook. Those kinds of things. It really is very impactful, as even commented by a doctor of psychology, that, all youth are experiencing this in one way or the other. I only say that by way of highlighting the richness of someone like St. John Bosco. In 1859, he established the Salesian Brothers, and a few years later, with St. Mary Mangelo, I believe, not margarine, but Mangelo, and he established the Salesian Sisters and did similar work with the young girls of that time. We recognize John Bosco today and certainly ask for his prayer and intercession on behalf of the youth of our time. He was the first to establish vocational schools. He had many rich benefactors because of the effective work that he did. And I suspect to this day, I don't know for sure, they're having a holiday in Italy today. We continue in the letter to the Hebrews. And really, the message today really is one of good example, that we are being prayed for, so that we have the courage of faith to resist the sin that seems to be all around us. Who is this great cloud of witnesses? It is those of whom we heard about yesterday, what we call today the communion of saints, those who have gone before us, our parents, our siblings, our loved ones, the whole people of God, now in the light and the glory of heaven. It's a rather stark verse that the reading closes with, "You have not yet, in the struggle against sin, resisted to the point of shedding blood." That verse has always struck me. We do the best we can, and we persist in virtue against the realities of sin, even in the frustration of our inability to do so perfectly. And so we have the power that Jesus perseveres in running his own race. Of course, I can't see the verse now. But that he himself endured the cross, despising its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of God. It's another way of saying Jesus lifted the burden of sin by his dying and rising. Do we then say, oh, well, God forgives me? No, we continue to live in the virtue of, let's say, John Bosco. Resist sin, confess sin. We're familiar with the story of the hemorrhaging woman and the child born, raised from the dead, born again. Notice the impressive verse here. She comes forward with fear and trembling. She wanted to sneak off. I say that just about every time. She wanted anonymous healing. There is no such thing. If she's only healed physically, chances are very good that ailment will come back. Seen it many times. She needs emotional, psychological, the healing of memories, so that she doesn't continue to think of herself as a wounded, ill, rejected person. She's healed by her faith. So she comes in fear and trembling and tells Jesus the whole truth. powerful. She let go, admitted, I suspect very shamefully in the midst of the crowd, because of the shame of a bleeding woman, she was unclean and couldn't go to the temple and had to live outside the community in the red tent because of her unclean situation. She tells her whole story. Now again, she doesn't really know who Jesus is, but she thinks to herself, if I just touch the tassel of his cloak, I will be healed. And so Jesus can quite rightly say, it is your faith that has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction, mind and body. Look at the profound compassion, the empathy of Jesus, that he deals really as an interruption. He's on his way to raise a little girl from the dead. He's interrupted with a bleeding woman of 12 years who herself is just ripe and ready for healing. He accepts the interruption, takes an extra moment, and interacts with her. Profound compassion, profound empathy, love. Love heals. And then love gives new life. The people are scorning him, ridiculing him. Oh, come on, we can tell a dead person. But God, in the power of love through Jesus, can give new life. As you pray and ponder today, consider that power of the Lord's love, his power of acceptance, empathy, and compassion. Pray to John Bosco, perhaps for your own needs, certainly for the needs of our youth today. May God be praised by our gathering and our reception, our hearing of the word, and reception of the Holy Sacrament. May God be praised and glorified this day by our faith and trust in him.